If you want a luxurious bathroom without spending a lot of money, today I'm going to give you some tips to achieve it. Let's get started. Tip number 1, combine textures. Natural textures give our spaces a very luxurious look, and in this case we can bring much more harmony to the bathroom. Much more luxury, and that special touch we might be missing. But natural textures have several issues. Well, in this case, 2. The first would be that if we overuse them, we can make our bathroom feel overwhelming. So it depends on the size of our bathroom. We're going to choose 1, 2, or 3 textures. By combining them, you can have a really beautiful bathroom. But it's true that if we use too many in a very small space or very different textures, we might get exactly the opposite of what we're looking for. The next drawback that natural materials might have is durability, since many of them don't last as long as other types of materials. So what can we do to make our natural material last longer? Well, we can replace it with another material that imitates it. In this case, for example, porcelain tiles that look like wood. This is often done with flooring. Before, parquet was used in most rooms, but it has increasingly been replaced by laminate, vinyl, and porcelain floors that imitate wood. They look great, they add that warmth and natural feel, but they last much longer in the long run. That's exactly what I did in the cabin. I wanted a wooden floor because I wanted that natural touch, but since I had a fireplace, I couldn't go for real wood. So what I did was put in a porcelain floor. The next point would be the placement of the towels, these little details that we sometimes don't pay attention to. Instead of placing the towel just like normal, as we would usually do, we can always choose other options. We can roll them up and leave them in a much more elegant way, which gives the bathroom a lot more presence. Closely related to this point, we move on to the next one, which would be other types of details, like bathrobes or, for example, the towel rack. Search for something original and unique that stands out, rather than using the typical one everyone has. We'll give our bathroom a fresh and original touch. As for the next point, it would be placing things above others. In other words, the freer our bathroom is, the better. A sense of order and cleanliness greatly enhances luxury. So how do we achieve this? Well, we put away the toothbrush and the hairbrush. We can hide all of this, and if we have an area that's visible no matter what, then we can choose some storage items to hide them. In this case, storage is essential, and the clearer and more uncluttered everything is, the better. The next thing would be to create a focal point. In this case, we could go for a piece of furniture. We can choose an original, eye-catching piece that grabs your attention as soon as you walk in. We could also combine it, for example, with a mirror that lights up. If the tiles are already beautiful, we've created harmony and the perfect combination here. When we enter the bathroom, if we find a focal point, then all eyes will be drawn there and we will create a bathroom. Well, much more harmonious and luxurious. We could also opt for a very different mirror, not the typical round or square mirror we've always had, but instead maybe use a half circle, a longer, elongated mirror. We have many mirror options, and we could use this same mirror as a focal point. The next one would be indirect lighting, which is also closely related to the previous point, with the lighting of the mirrors. Besides the lighting of these mirrors, we could create other types of indirect lighting, for example, around the perimeter of the bathroom. In addition to its beauty and luxury, it's also practical, especially if you need to use the restroom in the middle of the night. Well, you don't need to turn on that bright light, you can just turn on the indirect lighting and go in a much more relaxed way. It's true that we need a lot of light in a bathroom because if, for example, we need to wax our mustache, we have to see exactly where those little hairs are. But this lighting isn't always necessary, so by creating this alternative, we can choose one light or another depending on what we're going to do. Very related to the previous point. Oh, what a scare. Very related to the previous point. We would find indirect lighting in the form of recessed lighting. Recessed lighting is a construction option where there are 2 levels and one part is above the other. So it creates this indirect lighting that is used a lot in dining rooms or bathrooms. I'm telling you, it's not just because of the luxurious touch it gives, but also because it's very practical. It may seem like it's very difficult to build, but you really don't need that many materials. You would only need the plasterboard structure and plasterboard. Building it is neither difficult nor expensive. There are 2 options for the recessed area. Well, there are several options that, if you want, we can analyze later on, but in this case, I'm going to give you 2 options. The first would be to light up the perimeter area, and the other would be to light it inward. But be careful with this last option, because if the ceiling isn't completely smooth, all the imperfections we have will be visible. If not smooth, go with the first option. If smooth, choose the second. Let's not complicate the ceiling, there's still a lot of work left. If it's too expensive, we have a more affordable alternative, which I'll explain to you. It's the one we did in this bathroom, which is to place an angle along the perimeter and screw it in. The angles are very inexpensive. Especially the ones that are made of plastic, we can screw them to the ceiling very easily. And then we would add an LED strip, and with that we would have our low-cost indirect lighting. As mentioned, it's simple and inexpensive, but there's one consideration if we do it in the wet area. In the shower, using a waterproof LED strip is essential. A non-waterproof one simply won't function. The next point would be the radiator. Radiators aren't exactly pretty. Some are nicer, while others are a bit uglier. The thing is, for a bathroom, if we want to make it luxurious, we can look for alternatives to the typical radiator we've always had. In this case, for example, we can use a towel warmer radiator that dries the towels and at the same time doesn't look as bulky as a regular radiator. Or here, I'll leave you several options so you can see alternatives to radiators. These options won't be more economical than a radiator. Probably, or maybe not, I don't know, we'd have to look at each one individually, but it's true that they're going to give us much more luxury than the traditional radiator. The next would be the niches, which I personally love. Niches are these recesses in the wall, which we often use to place decorative items, or even soaps in the shower area. They are beautiful and practical, and in my opinion, they add a touch of luxury. Despite seeming complex, like the recessed ceiling here, it's not that complicated. We have three options, more or less. Let's explain them. The first would be drywall. We would create the drywall structure, close it up with drywall, and that's it. This one might be the most complicated. The second option would be to make, a hole, right? This one is probably the least recommended because if it's a load-bearing wall, we could damage the structure and we shouldn't do it. And if it were a very thin wall made of very thin brick, could we end up going through to the other room? And that would be a problem, right? What is the third option, which would be, in this case, the easiest one? Use insulating panels. Later on the Decorate Your House channel, I'll show you how to use them, but in this case, with the insulating panels. The niches are already made, so we just have to screw them onto our plasterboard structure and they'll be installed. We would just need to add the final covering later, and we would have a beautiful niche in our bathroom. And if we want to add the finishing touch, we could put some lighting in the niche and it would look luxurious, wouldn't it? What's next? And finally, the last point, which is no less important, would be to embed the shower faucet. Besides being much more practical for cleaning, I think it looks much nicer and more aesthetic when it's hidden behind the wall. We have another added value that we sometimes overlook. And that's that we can separate the water area from the area where we access it. Where we have access to the water. And that's because at first the water usually comes out cold. So if we don't want to get wet, which is something I sometimes struggle with, to turn on the water and avoid getting wet at first, we can separate it. Leave it to one side, the water area and the turning on area in another. We often overlook this practical aspect, which can only be achieved if we incorporate it from the beginning. And these would be the key points that I find practical when creating our bathroom design. I hope you found them useful. See you in upcoming videos soon. Thank you.